Okay, welcome to, I guess, 2024 to 2025. I mean, we started this a long time ago. We're 25. And the thing is, people said before, you're going to get up to modern times. Honestly speaking, isn't 2000 like ancient history? First of all, besides everything else, all joking aside, anything before October 7th is ancient history. That, sadly, okay? And second of all, at our age, who can remember where they were 25 years ago? Anyway, let's start formally. This is the 2024-2025 series. As you see, it's called A New Century But No Peace. A new century but no peace. Actually, a new millennium, right? State of Israel and the Jewish people, 2000 to 2004. First, I want to thank, as always, Shomer Emunah. We have to be derech eretz. They let us use this again here. Right? Thank Rabbi Marwick and the officers. Always we thank the Lehmann family for sponsoring the series, as they do every year so kindly. Tonight, as you see, our sponsor is Steve Kaplan, who's probably our most loyal sponsor over the years, so thank you very much, Steve. If you look, there's 12 altogether so far, and 7 are covered, so we need sponsors for 5 more. That's how it works. We need 5 more sponsors. I do, as always, want to thank our tech team. This was just the first shakedown cruise because we had this stuff at near Tummin from my last, series. Next time, they'll be hitting the ground. And obviously, I don't have to tell you, from now on it's 8 o'clock. The clock turns back. We all know this stuff. So as I say before, all you have to do is just do the paperwork with the registrar, and you're ready to go. Without any further ado, I'll get down to business. As I said, funny, not funny, really 2000 is like ancient history now, because so much has happened in the last 24 years, okay? Good and bad, a lot of bad. For example, do you even remember, now she was personifying this, who even remembers the Y2K crisis, right? Yeah, okay, the mathematicians around here, I get it. The computer experts, Howard, okay, I get it. But not dummies like me, not regular consumers. It's something, they'll have to fix it somehow or other, right? Otherwise, you just get hacked at SARS, so are the banks and everybody else. So that's, like if you ask somebody, when was Y2K? It was like 40 years ago, Right. Where were you 24? Oh, I was just getting married. No, that was actually 55 years ago. No. Right? And as I said before, sadly, anything before October 7th, 2023 is from a different universe. As we all know, the October 7th, these are not the worst photos, as you know. And these hostages are still there, aren't they? Okay? So we can't even say the parsha of October 7th is over. Right? The Chatafim are still there, the war is going on. We all know this. They're still in Gaza and Lebanon, and every day is more casualties. So anything before that is like the halcyon old days, like these old movies, the story, novels you had before Pearl Harbor. You know what I mean? Like that. And of course, the current war, gets to the next one, remains. The soldiers are still going down these verstunken tunnels. Right? Your cousins, your brothers, your uncles, this, that, and the other, are going, in harm's way. Okay, big time. And now on 2 fronts, as we all know. Now, I told you so. What have we been talking about the last years? That the Hezbollah and the Hamas are going to turn their territory into Stalingrads. That's what we've had. And you know and I know, if not for the shock of October 7th, which really sort of electrified Israel in the way that Pearl Harbor did the United States. I think most of us know enough American history to know that on December 6th, 1941, the vast majority of Americans didn't have anything to do with any war. And then December 7th came, and by December 8th, that had changed. He said, we got to do what you got to do, even though this country sent millions in harm's way. He said, you got to do it. That's exactly what happened in Israel, as we all know. A year ago, before Simchas Torah, right or wrong, we knew that an existential problem existed with the Stalingrad and the tunnels up there in the Hezbollah land and down there in Hamas land. And Israel, whatever reason, I hate to say I criticize, but it was what it was. And now it's come home to roost. In 2000, Bill Clinton was still president. That's ancient history. That's before Trump. It's before Biden. It's before Obama. It's before Bush. My goodness, it's the same time as George Washington, basically. You understand? It's like long, long ago. And at that time, in 2000, if you remember, Clinton had just survived impeachment and other Republican shenanigans, okay? Now, after Trump, this is like every 2 days, right? But at that time, whoever heard of an impeachment, you had to go back to Andrew Johnson in the 19th century. And we got used to all kind of unprecedented scenes. Boy, have we gotten used to this. But in the larger picture, in the longer view, the more dispassionate view, beyond the character flaws and scandals which will always tarnish the image of Bill Clinton, right? He did have an amazing economy. Look at the numbers. Look at that. It's by the way, these are, first you see deficits, and then you see plus. When's the last time you had a plus? The deficits went down from 220 billion, a little bit up because of the recession, and then 20, a deficit of this, a deficit of this, a deficit of 20 billion. My goodness, what president wouldn't kill to have a deficit of 20 billion? Of only 20 billion, okay?
Rather than trillion.
Yes, and what do you call it? And I mean, no, an annual deficit of 20 billion. It's way beyond that. What's the annual deficit now? Somebody can Google it. And then a plus, and then a plus, and then a plus. Look at that plus. It's almost $250 million plus. $250 billion, I meant. $250 billion plus. That's probably the last time we'll ever see that. Okay? So, yes, Clinton had his minuses. I get that. As I said before, he messed his own image up. But you can't deny that he had the pluses. So in 2000, I know you'll remember this, people were discussing in the 2000 election, what are we going to do with the plus? You're going to, solve Social Security? Remember that? And the lockbox and all this kind of business. And this one said this, and this one said that. Bush, if you remember, just blew it away. It was a time, 2000, when we thought or hoped that communism was over and that Russia is going to become a truly democratic liberal country. They hoped, right? This is when Yeltsin was still president, and this is when Putin first got elected, and nobody knew how bad he would be. I mean, it's sad to think. There's a time Russia was not attacking Ukraine. They were letting all the Jews go. Yeltsin, say what you want about him, he let all the Jews who want to go. And to be perfectly honest, Putin has done the same thing. So it's better than the communism, but Putin has taken it in an authoritarian direction. In this flush of optimism, the West perhaps made a mistake. As you see, all the countries in Europe joined NATO, which Russia, of course, and I understand this, sees as a direct attack on them. You understand? The countries that used to be in the Warsaw Pact are now in the NATO. That's no good. Let's read this. Following the dissolution of the Soviet Union, many former Warsaw State and post-Soviet states want to join NATO. Poland, Hungary, Czech Republic became in 1999, amidst much debate within NATO. Now, Russia at that time said, don't do that. Matter of fact, if I take you back to George Bush Sr., that's James Baker and all that, was a whole big negotiation how to let East Germany become part of West Germany, and what's the NATO angle on this, you see? But nothing beyond that. But of course, as soon as these countries got rid of Russia, they said, we'll do anything to keep them not coming back. Okay? NATO then formalized the process of joining the organization with membership action plans which aided the accession of seven Central Eastern European countries shortly before the Istanbul Summit. So in other words, Bulgaria, Estonia, Lithuania, Latvia, Romania, Slovakia, Slovenia all joined NATO. Right? 2 countries in the Adriatic, Albania and Croatia. My goodness, Albania, which was the most Maoist state ever lived. You remember that? They were beyond Russia even. Now they're in NATO. and joined in April 9. The next member state was Montenegro and North Macedonia. I don't think the Russians got too scared about Montenegro joining NATO, but Poland, Hungary, Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia, which are the next door, the Russia's doorstep. So you can understand, and today it's debated, was this the right move or not? Yeah, that's now, right? So basically, everybody hates Russia. I wonder why. There's your first assignment. 10, 20 words, why they hate Russia, okay? But that's going back at that time. Now, the question is how this affects Israel, okay? Because at the end of the day, Putin will end up in the first decade of the 21st century supporting the Syrian dictatorship. Excuse me, a massive Russian intervention in the Syrian civil war. Assad, the dictator, couldn't hold on to his own country without foreign help. As you and I know, he got help from Iran, from Hezbollah. This is why, of course, everybody was rejoicing in Syria when Nasrallah was killed the other day by Israel, right? Because they were killed by his guys in the Syrian civil war. Now, I realize you got to have a menu, what is it called? You know, playbill, yeah, something like that. But I think everybody here is sufficiently aware of what I'm talking about. The fact that you're here tonight means you're kind of somewhat on current what's happening in the Middle East. And the Arabs are very embarrassed. They killed Nasrallah, and the Arabs are all rejoicing, okay? And so how Russia feels and what direction it goes into massively affects Israel. It's interesting, if I can just take a minute, that Israel and Russia are like dancing a certain ballet. The Russians haven't formally come out attacking Israel, which they could, but all the weapons that they're finding in the tunnels are from Russia. I don't know if you know that. Yeah, look up the intelligence stuff. Huh? The stuff that they're finding in the Hamas tunnels is new Russian weapons, okay? So, on the other hand, we all know Bibi can't condemn Russia. If they join fully in the wrong side, it's really problematic for Israel. And welcome to the world of diplomacy. Now, Clinton, throughout his presidency, if you remember, played around with Iraq. There was always back and forth bombing and this and that and the other, with Saddam Hussein was still in power. Because George Bush Sr. busted Saddam Hussein's army, but if you remember, he didn't go to Iraq. Now, today he looks smart for not doing that. Didn't go into Iraq. But that left the bad guy in charge. And Saddam Hussein, not surprisingly, was using every possibility to rebuild himself and one day, whenever, get revenge on the United States and Israel and everybody else. In other words, he was not going to reform and say, I made a mistake, but now I'm going to come like Franco. Be a dictator in my own country, not bother anybody else. You see, we all remember that he continued to bankroll all the Palestinian terrorists. Whoever got killed, he gave him $25,000. You remember this, right? And his intelligence operations tried to hurt America all the time. And basically, it was kind of a cat and mouse game. He did this, and America would bomb him. And he did that, and America would do this or that. He foolishly messed with American feelings all during the 1990s. If he would have been smart in a Bismarckian way, he would have said, I made a mistake tangling with the U.S. I can be in charge of Iraq. They're not tangled with the U.S. The Soviet Union was no longer around for him to team up with. So just concentrate on being a dictator in Iraq. But it's against his nature. You know, a tiger can't stop being a tiger. You have to kill. You understand? And really, it's like a movie drama or a novel, because, let's put it this way, a year after Clinton became president, during the first year of Clinton's presidency, Saddam Hussein tried to kill George Bush Sr. I don't know if you know that. George Bush Sr., after he was president, went to visit Kuwait. And Saddam Hussein, this was stupid, said, oh, I'm going to get him because of revenge. They had a car bomb or something like that. Now, let's put it this way. I fully realize that in 1993, the farthest thing that could be in the mind of Saddam Hussein was 8 years from now, the son of George Bush is become president of the United States and put you in the crosshairs and do whatever it takes to get you, even if it bankrupts America. You understand? But there's a lesson in that in international politics, isn't there? Okay? You don't know what tomorrow will bring, and be very careful. I mean, you couldn't write this movie, correct? Because who was George Bush Jr. in 1993? A drunk, right? Was he in a baseball? He owned a baseball team or something like that, right? I mean, he wasn't a player, you see? So who could figure, right? So the Rebbeinu Shalom has a good sense of humor, is what I'm saying over here. It was a big mistake. This would come to haunt Saddam Hussein in the next administration, as you know. Clinton, if you recall, also fought the Serbians. I don't know if you remember this. He bombed Belgrade. The American Air Force bombed the European capital because they were killing the people in Kosovo and all that business, right? Bosnia. Who recalls this anymore? You understand? You see what I'm saying? To the U.S., but in general, Clinton, wisely, so like this, I'll do a little bombing here, this, and the other together with him. We're not getting into a big war because that'll wreck the economy again. We're actually pulling ourselves out of the deficit, and we're getting to the plus side. That's theoretically the only way America can solve its deficit crisis, by getting pluses, by growing the economy, and then putting it towards the deficit. Now, it's impossible today. What is it, 36 trillion? That's like sooner or later, the next president or the one after that is going to have to sign a bankruptcy. You understand? And there's nowhere to go. But, by the way, Trump would be the guy for that, right? He's had a lot of experience. If he sits down next to David Friedman, who was his bankruptcy lawyer, for a national speech, you know where it's going. And so America was trying not to get involved in wars, but a superpower was trying to maintain some kind of international order, and we have to do that. We cannot be isolationists, even though we want to be isolationists, right? Since 1945, the USA has wanted to be isolationists, because after all, we don't need to, we're doing fine over here. But if you leave it alone, this guy will come and get you, this one will hurt you, that one will hurt you. Now it's the radical Islam, there'll be other groups, Chinese. And of course, there was the Arab-Israeli conflict that existed 24 years ago as well. Here, the Clinton administration, if you recall, made a full court press to get an end to the conflict through a two-state solution. Clinton personally dove deep in the matter and gave it much personal attention. I would say, as you see over here, that Jimmy Carter and Bill Clinton were the most engaged presidents in the Middle East. You understand? I mean, they devoted a lot of time to this sort of thing. The others, had to do it also. I get it. But they didn't like it, and they didn't, like Carter, remember, took off weeks and weeks just on the Begin Sadat thing, right? And Clinton also did. Trouble is, you're running up against existential problems. In many ways, these years, especially late 90s, 2000, were the high water marks of the two-state solution, okay? When we see the pictures of Rabin and shaking hands and all the rest of them, that's Clinton's time, you see? And it's just interesting now to remember, Clinton, of course, had four Israeli prime ministers. It was Rabin, and then Peres, and then Netanyahu and Barak. So three of them, the first, second, and fourth, were from the left, from the Labor Party. And Netanyahu, who was there for a disastrous 2 years, is from the Likud, of course, from the right. So most of the time, Clinton was, as you know, how should I put it, really engaged in dealing with the three prime ministers who agreed with him on trying to work out this two-state solution, what I call the TSS. How do you make it happen? And these prime ministers, especially Barak, were willing to give away the whole store if you get a real and genuine peace treaty putting an end to the war. So I'm talking about the whole West Bank, the whole Gaza Strip, the Har HaBayis, and the rest of East Jerusalem. The idea was that the Arafat will have well, Israel will have the Jewish quarter and the Armenian quarter, right? Which leads you to Kotel. And, like we walk, and the Arabs will have the other side. It's crazy, meaning in terms of its practicability, but that was the plan. And they even said, we're not getting rid of the settlements, but we'll keep the settlements. You can take 4% of the rest of Israel. Right? So let's say, for argument's sake, you can take, around Nazareth or something like that, which is a lot of Arabs anyway. Al-Faham. This was more or less the plan. Rabin and Peretz went along with it. Barak really went along with it. Bibi did not go along with it. And as a result, Clinton kind of got rid of Bibi, meaning that Bibi was not very competent at that time. Remember, they debauched the assassination of the Hamas guy and all that, Khalid Mashal. We talked about it last year. They blew stuff in his ear, the whole thing. Clinton sent James Carville to Israel to run the campaign of Barak against Bibi. And that's how Barak won. Now, Barak was only here for 2 years. He also had a disastrous term. Okay? As we'll see. So, Clinton was really engaged in Israeli politics. Okay? I remember I didn't like that. But to be fair about it, Leshitaso, he meant well. That is to say, he thought he's going to bring a real and final, genuine peace on this issue. Didn't work out exactly that way. Now, Clinton is the ultimate politician. And right now, I don't mean that in a bad way. And so he sincerely wanted Israel to gain a genuine peace and security. But wait a minute, at the same time, he wanted the Palestinians to gain the same thing, peace and security. In other words, Clinton bet that he could get the Palestinians to genuinely accept Israel and live in peace with the state of Israel, Arafat. In other words, he wanted to make everybody happy. More accurately, he wanted the vital center of both sides to be happy. Of course, there'll be people in the extremes that won't like it, among the Arabs as well as the Israelis. But the majority will support this kind of approach. He realized that the extremes will be unhappy, and it's a very American approach. Now, it's a formerly very American approach, right? This country used to be characterized by what they call the vital center, right? In other words, what's the big difference between Clinton and John McCain? Not much. Get it? They were both in what's called the vital center. Now, what's the difference between Trump and Kamala? They're not like this, they're like that. You see? That's a reflection of the country, it's not them. The country is like here and here. This has been very polarized. You know this. If you don't know this, then you're in La La Land, that's all. The country is extremely polarized. The people who are on the left look at Trump like Hitler. The people on the right look like Kamala as Hitler. I don't agree. He look like Hitler, right? And that's how it goes. So, and to be perfectly honest, this really started under Clinton, if you want to be honest about it, because it's the culture wars. You understand? And people really feel put upon. Now, liberals don't understand that, and conservatives get all fuzzy-eyed about it. The cultural stuff has really become the divided nation. Now, it's interesting. Are you able to put that clip on with the Clinton thing? Okay, so let's put that on now. I think you saw this. The other day, Clinton was in Michigan, and what was considered controversial in 2000 is actually very right-wing now.
And the only time Yasser Arafat didn't tell me the truth was when he promised me he was going to accept the peace deal that we had worked out, which would have given the Palestinians a state on 96% of the West Bank and 4% of Israel, and they got to choose where the 4% of Israel was. So they would have the effect of the same land of all the West Bank. They would have a capital in East Jerusalem. They would have I can hardly talk about this. And they would have equal access all day, every day, to the security towers that Israel maintained all through the West Bank up to the Golden House. All this was offered, including, I will say it again, a capital in East Jerusalem and 2 of the 4 quadrants of the old city of Jerusalem, confirmed by the Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Barak and his cabinet. And they said no. And I think part of it is that Hamas did not care about a homeland for the Palestinians. They wanted to kill Israelis and make Israel uninhabitable. Well, I got news for them. They were there first. Before their faith existed, they were
Jewish.
there. In the time of King David, and the southernmost tribes had Judea and Samaria.
Now, by the way, he must be a little Iberbottle because he gave this speech to an Arab audience in Michigan. Yeah, I promise you. Yeah, read it up, you'll see. And now there's a big bad reaction against us, like, you know. And he believes in the Jewish Bible, God forbid, you know, the Jews were there long ago, and so on and so forth. So I'll say it again, he didn't mean bad, just it was a flawed approach, because first of all, Arafat won't keep the word, and second of all, that's number one, and number two, it didn't take into account Hamas. Today, I don't have to expatiate on what Hamas is, right? And so what's the point of making a deal with this one if this one said, but I still get to keep shooting at you? You see? They weren't very weak. Arafat was afraid of them. They weren't necessarily as strong as they are now, but they were they're very, first of all, I'll address this right now, and then I'll move on. All during this time, and for the next several years, into around 2004, the Hamas kept doing suicide bombings in Israel. The suicide bombing was done by Hamas. Not by, yeah, well, we'll live and learn. This is the problem. What's the point of, you know, it's like there's a landlord who owns the house and then there's the people actually living in it. So I buy the house from the landlord, yeah, but you go there, the guy will shoot you. You see? So, you know, these were the flaws. But, you know, Clinton, and I can understand, you know, what he tried to do. He hoped that if they'll get a treaty and all the rest of it, it'll somehow transcend. But to be perfectly honest, history shows you can't get any kind of a peace unless the group that's making the peace kills the people that are opposed to the peace, like in Ireland and in many other places. You understand? It's a well-known thing in poli-sci. If this is the group that's making the peace, then they have to get rid or suppress those who are opposed to it. There was no way they're going to suppress Hamas, because really the Palestinians themselves actually agree with them, you see? So I'm talking in old days, long ago, when the Hamas seems like you say, so who are they? They're a small group, all the rest of it. They weren't. They've been a real problem, even back in the time of Bill Clinton. The Hamas actually started during the time of Reagan. Okay? The Hamas started in the Reagan time. Anyway, as I said, this would require Israel abandoning some of the settlements in Shtachim, which meant that the Clinton administration bet on the Israeli left. Bet on the Israeli left, the Labor Party and all those guys being in power. La'afuki, the Israeli right. He says, I know the right's not going to agree with me, that's why he got rid of Bibi. You see? Those people are just incorrigible, and they're unreasonable, and, you know, since it's a democracy, we can make the vote that they get outvoted. So this was the fundamental American position. You and I know now with hindsight, when Barack left office, that's the last time the left had power. You see? The Israeli voters have never trusted that again. But at the time I'm talking about, in 2000, it was the last hurrah, but there was still a powerful Israeli left. Not as powerful as they had been before, when they dominated the country, but there was still a powerful Israeli left, with the same elites that are characterized by it now, but there were more of them, okay? And perhaps I should say there were less of the rightists. a very important factor is that the Ruskies that all moved to Israel have ended up joining the right on this issue, the right. The ongoing difference between the left and the right, as far as the Palestinians is concerned, is like the defining political difference in Israeli politics for a long time. I mean, what's the difference between the left and the right in Israel? How they feel you should have a policy towards the Palestinians. What do you do with them? They're there. Millions of them, increasing all the time. What do you do with them? The left has always said, and still does, you have to do something. We have to make wise concessions. It'll involve concessions. You have to wise concessions, but we'll get something in return for it. The right has always said, you're in a fool's paradise. Things will not get better, they'll be worse. You give them half the city, Yerushalayim, be under, Hamas or the PLO or whatever, and they'll just launch rockets, into the Kotel or in the Jewish quarter, which will be a block away. You understand? Like, how are you going to stop that? The left says, you don't know until you try. And peace is the grand goal. All the songs in Israel about peace. All the dreams in Israel. The time you can put the war behind you. Not today. That's not the songs they're singing today. But it was a year ago. Right? Before October 7th, the songs are all about peace. We don't want our kids and our grandchildren fighting wars and dying and getting wounded and maimed and shell-shocked. I get it. Because that is what's happening now in Israel. I'm sorry to say, we all are. People are getting killed and wounded and maimed and shell-shocked. I always say, my son now is very good at the PTSD treatment and LSW, but he can't speak Ivrit. So there's a massive need for hundreds of people to come in with these skills because they got a ton of mentally wounded, I'll put it that way. I just said in Shul today, in the magazine, I forget, the Mizrahi, some other magazine, they have all these new mishaberos that these Kippah Sruga Rabbanim are composing for the current situation. And it says, to cure them, begufam uvenafsham. You can have somebody who's shell-shocked, as they used to say, and his goof is fine, but the nefesh is not fine. Right? The nefesh is not fine. Anyhow, this was indeed the motivation for Yitzhak Rabin, who was a soldier, right? Rabin all his life was a soldier, but he said, we can't keep fighting. Now, the truth is, you got to keep fighting. I think it's pretty clear to Israelis, this is not the last war. And it hurts me to say it, I don't want to be right, I hope I'm wrong. But raise your hand if you think that this is the last war. You understand? Rabin, it would later, under different circumstances, lead another prime minister, interestingly, who was a soldier, to evacuate Gaza, Sharon, who was a soldier. Now, we know from now that this was made possible, the massacres of October 7th, I get it, but a professional soldier understands the strains of patrolling occupied territory and the toll it takes on the troops. So Rabin didn't do it because he loved the Palestinians. He did because he loved the Israeli soldiers, and he said, we can't just continue this occupation business. It's taking too much of the strain on the soldiers. Problem is, what is the alternative? So the soldier prime ministers, and there are three. There's Rabin, Ehud Barak was an Israeli general, remember? Chief of staff. And Sharon. Not sissies, all combat veterans. Right? And he said, we have to do something to disengage our soldiers from doing these occupations. It didn't work. They pulled out of Gaza. It's a terrible situation. Like, what do? You understand? They'll never stop the bad guys from shooting rockets at Israel. Do you think when this is over, look, I hope I'm wrong, when you think this is over, this war in Gaza, they're not going to shoot any more rockets in Israel? They're doing it as we speak. You see? So what do you do with that? The only way to really win an asymmetrical war is to go savage like the Romans used to, or the Russians. The Russians in 19th century fought like in these Chechnya and Circassia places in the Caucasus against the Muslims, and they wouldn't give in. They just would not give in. And they kept fighting again and again and again. And finally, the Russians said, the heck with it, and they killed all the men and the women and the children. The Romans used to do that, right? If you want to fight an asymmetrical war, well, then there's only one way to win. Israel can't do that. And so what do? These are the big existential questions. That's why you can only think about Israeli politics for a while, and then you have to watch Mickey Mouse for a while. You understand? In the minds of these Israeli decision makers, and indeed of the Israeli left in general, it was better, if it came to war, to fight future wars from inside Israel proper with motivated soldiers. That's what's happening now, right? In other words, we didn't have people doing, let's put it this way. Suppose Israel was still occupying Gaza, and in spite of that, somehow or other, Hamas launched this whole thing. The Israelis would be pointing fingers at themselves. This is all the fault of the occupation. You see? And there'd be all this self-searching and self-criticism because that's who we are. On the other hand, since we had no soldiers in Gaza, and this was clearly a black and white, clear act of murderous aggression, pure hatred and aggressive hatred and killing and raping and burning and all the rest of it that we all know, so at least the Israelis had moral clarity. You didn't find the Israeli left saying on October 8th, we should, turn the other cheek, or it's our fault, or this, that, and the other. You see? So that's the reason these guys pulled out. It was this consideration that led Ehud Barak in 2000 to completely withdraw from South Lebanon, if anybody remembers that, thereby allowing Hezbollah to, number one, gain tremendous creds and political legitimacy. Okay? That's how Nasrallah got big. See, we're the only ones that defeated Israel. It's true. Egypt never defeated Israel in war. Jordan didn't. Syria didn't. Iraq didn't. Hezbollah did. Through asymmetrical warfare. By which I mean they chased them out of Arab territory. Sadat could not chase the Israeli army out of the Sinai. King Hussein could not chase the Israeli army out of the West Bank. Assad Sr. and Assad Jr. couldn't chase Israel off the Golan Heights. But the Hezbollah chased them out of southern Lebanon, south of the Litani River. Look how gavaldic we are. So Barak simply said, I'm willing to bite that bullet and let them get the prestige, get the Israelis out of there. And number two, the other problem is, what did Hezbollah do ever since then? Certainly after 2006. Built all the tunnels, as we call it. They turned the place into a Stalingrad, which gave the Israeli army a bloody nose in 2006, if you remember. Now, I'm not covering that this year, but that was the war we lost. I'll say it again. The Lebanon War of 2006, for whatever reason, Israel lost. Okay? And so, as you know from current events, look at these tunnels that they're finding now over there. I told you this, I don't want to say, but, because they've hooked up with the North Koreans. You understand? I actually did a podcast a year ago. North Korea, back in 1950 and 51, when MacArthur went in there, in Incheon, and went all the way to the Yala River, and then the Chinese kind of reinforced them, the Americans could bomb the heck out of the Chinese from the air. We put very heavy casualties on the communist soldiers coming down, because our Air Force was better at that time. This is the height of the American Air Force supremacy. So he went underground. He dug these immense tunnels. And if you remember, about 15, 20 years ago, there's these incidents that the North Koreans are digging tunnels into South Korea. Do you remember that? Right? Well, son of a gun. They picked that up in the Middle East. Right? It's an interesting business. In other words, they did not get a peaceful northern border. And as we now know, they had a staging point for doing their own October 7th. Because as it's come out in the reports, and I know you know this, you can't be living in the moon. Hezbollah was planning to do what the Hamas did, right? And they would probably do a more effective job than the Hamas did, I'm sorry to say. And so it's a silver lining in the cloud. That Hamas jumped the gun and all the rest of it. Therefore, Israel was able to preempt them and kill them with the pagers and the walkie-talkies and the Nasrallah and Habab Acharab, and all the rest of it. And they didn't get a chance to implement. I mean, I know you read this. What's happened the last 2 or 3 weeks? Israel come across all these tunnels stacked with weapons, stacked with Coca-Cola and other foods. Well, because his wife is having operations. That's a different story. It's a. That's not a real question, right? That's not a real question. 3 demerits, for Tom Glenn. Look, this was facilitated because the Israeli army pulled out of Southern. On the other hand, what are we supposed to do for the last 24 years? Every day another soldier gets killed by a road bomb. Every day another couple soldiers get killed from a terrorist thing. It's not good choices, right? It's not good choices. Now, as I said before, it's a weird positive side of the current war. If only it didn't cost lives, right? If only it didn't. No, you can say the Hamas attack was good, the Hezbollah attack, except that we lost so many people. You see, so you can't say that. Ehud Barak, the prime minister of Israel in 2000, had gambled that this would not happen, but he was proved wrong. That this is the advantage of doing a history course 25 years later. You have a sense of perspective, but it's not a perspective. I wish we didn't. In other words, if I were doing this last year, at this time, well, that doesn't work, does it? Yeah, before October 7th. You know what I mean? 2 years ago, I would be talking in different terms. And if I said anything bad, I would just simply be giving my opinion. Now, history has. Remember Joe and I said like this, it's too early to tell about the French Revolution? Well, turned out before October 7th was too early to tell about this. But now it's not. So Barak, who was a general, wanted to stanch the slow but constant loss of blood to Hezbollah inside Lebanon. In other words, he was driven by considerations of morale, which is what I told you motivated Rabin and Sharon. Bibi has not been a general. No more. So when Israel pulled out, no more patrolling hostile villages and cities. You can understand that. The soldiers were writing home to the parents, saying, I don't want to serve in the army if this is what it involves. On the other hand, this presumes that if Israel pulls out, the Arabs won't attack, which was a mistake, which is what the right in Israel always argued back, and which we know today was indeed a mistake. Now, really, this is an oversimplification. By 2000, the Arab Muslim world, by 2000, was already divided on the question of genuine peace with Israel. Some Arab countries, or at least their regimes, were indeed willing to make peace with Israel in the context of a two-state solution. In 2000, Barak and the left had their eyes on these states. And Barak gambled, that's what it was, a gamble, that Arafat would behave like those states. The question, of course, is, would Arafat really want to live in peace? Now, it's hard for me to do this because Arafat's been dead 20 years. So he seems like a figure from the ancient past. When he was alive, he was a dangerous son of a gun, you see? And he was not really interested, Bill Clinton notwithstanding, in getting a real peace with Israel so that the winners would be the Jews who get with most of Israel. According to him, they shouldn't get any. You certainly shouldn't get most, and all they have is the West Bank and the God. That's how they look at it, you see? The problem at that time was the other actors: Syria, Iraq, Iran, Libya, the Palestinian hardliners like Hamas. In other words, if we look at the Arab world in 2000, not today, 2000, that time, they were already worried about this country, Iran. Morocco would make peace with Israel with a two-state solution. Not Algeria, not Libya. Yes, Egypt already had a treaty. Jordan already had a treaty. Syria was always like, which way is it going to go? Saudi Arabia would make peace if they had a two-state solution. The rich Gulf states over here would do so. Sudan already has done so today. Yeah, you see what I'm saying? It's very complicated. And so Israel, right or wrong, the government of Israel, so I guess it's worth it for us to establish relations with all these countries I just mentioned, and hopefully we'll win over the others as well. Recall, in 2000, not like today, Russia and China were not relevant. Russia had not reasserted itself in international affairs. And so it wasn't a player in the Middle East. China wasn't there yet either. They were having their signs, but wasn't that either. They were concentrating on stealing American technology. That was the main thing. Recall, in 2000, it was the old Turkey before Erdogan, which was actually allied with Israel. Does anybody remember that? Okay. Israel and the Israeli military and the Turkish military were like that at that time. But on the other hand, what kind of a peace is it if many actors don't agree to stop trying to destroy Israel? What's the point if the PLO, even let's say that they meant it, that these group of Arabs won't make war, but their children or next door neighbor, the ones in Hamas, will continue to make bombs and blow up Israel. So what'd you gain? Maybe you could argue that for a real peace, it was worth it to evacuate the Shtachim in spite of the military risk. But it's not going to be a real peace because the rejectionists will be there. Then how can you justify the military risks? If Syria is going to continue always to try to kill you, Iraq is always going to try to kill you, if Algeria and this country and that country will kill you, and you have all these different Palestinian groups like the Hamas and the others, the Islamic Jihad and one after the other, are going to try to kill you. So it's not like you're making a bitter concessions, but you're getting something from it. You're making bitter concessions, but you're still going to be going to war. That's the question. Already at that time, in 2000, Hamas was growing, and it was a powerful rejectionist force, willing to pocket any concession Arafat could wring from the Israelis and then proceed to prosecute an ever more efficient struggle against Israel, at that time by suicide bombings. And that's what we're doing. I know you'll remember this. Why does Sharon eventually make a wall? Because the terrorists were just crossing all the time. Easiest thing in the world. From the West Bank. You just walk into Israel and blow yourself up. So you need a physical wall to at least, if it can't completely stop it, it can stop a lot of it. Okay? So what does that mean? They had a full peace with the PLA, as they called it at that time, with the Arafat group. Yeah, but doesn't stop the others from from blowing everything up in Tel Aviv, at the discos and at the grocery stores and at all the shows and all the other places. Arafat, as I explained last year, number one, did not want to mess with Hamas because they could overthrow him and kill him. And number two, he basically agreed with them. He didn't want Israel to continue to survive. So what is it that motivated Barak and the left to advocate such a policy? This leads us to a major Israeli motive for wanting a two-state solution, and that is the historic Israeli quest, Zionist quest for legitimacy. Israel wants political legitimacy. The people who are marching, the Arabs and the Hamas groups in America today, as I speak today, their main attack is against Israeli legitimacy. They're not saying Israel has failed to produce a two-state solution. They say even if they did a two-state solution, Israel has no right to exist even in Tel Aviv because it's land stolen from the original inhabitants and so forth and so on. I mean, you hear this rhetoric all the time. That's why Clinton was actually giving a la-la speech because the people in Michigan that he was talking to, I mean, they don't want nothing. Israel has no right to be ever since the beginning. And so it is a challenge for Israel today, and Bibi's not the guy to get this, to get some kind of real legitimacy. People say Israel has the right to exist, let alone hold on to land. The split in the Arab ranks lay precisely in the difference in the Arab hashkafa, meaning, is it possible under any circumstances to acknowledge the political legitimacy of the state of Israel? Even Egypt and Jordan, which circumstances force them to do this, they don't really believe that. If you acknowledge a country has to do, and Egypt and Jordan have signed on this, then under international norms, you can't attack them. They got a right to be. There's a lot of things that flow from that. Whereas if I deny you your basic legitimacy, then just a bunch of numbers. I can do whatever I want to you. Such legitimacy quest has been a basic feature of Zionism going back to 1897 and Theodor Herzl. Zionism, from the beginning, has always sought not just to be a Jewish state, but a legitimate one. What was the original program in the Basel Congress? It said, Zionism seeks to establish a home in Palestine for the Jewish people, secured under public law. That's European talk for under international law. Right? Herzl said, we don't want to come as thieves in the night. We want a country. This is the very beginning of Zionism. We want a country like any other country. France has a right to be in France. Germany has a right to be in Germany. Italy has a right to be in Italy. Israel, or whatever you call it, will be right for the Jews. They want a legitimate state. That was a key feature of Herzl. It was a key feature of Chaim Weizmann and the Balfour Declaration. What was the great accomplishment of Weizmann? He got, first of all, listen closely. He got the British in World War I to issue a declaration, the Balfour Declaration, the war's over, they'll establish a national home for the Jewish people. And then Weizmann got the League of Nations to all vote, that was the United Nations at that time, to vote what I just said, that Palestine should be the national home of Jewish people, that England has been given the mandate in order to facilitate the achievement of the national home of Jewish people, with language that said that the Arabs should not be hurt. Nothing should be done to hurt the rights of the non-Jewish inhabitants of the country. Be a democratic state. So that's the San Remo Treaty of 1920. That means the world, this is quite an achievement. All the countries, because the Arabs didn't have countries at that time. The Arabs did not have countries at that time. But all the countries said that Palestine should be a national home for the Jewish people. Balfour, the language of Balfour Declaration in there, excuse me, and also said that the World Zionist Organization is the official representative of the Jewish people. That's what it says in the Balfour Declaration. That's what it says in the international law of 1920, Treaty of San Remo. Okay? This was quite an accomplishment. Of course, the Arabs were screaming and this, that, and the other, and I understand why. But they didn't have the political clout, and they didn't have Arab states at that time, and they couldn't stop it. So that means in international law, Zionism had legitimacy. What we end up calling the Jewish Agency is just the World Zionist Organization. That's what that is. Right? That's the term. The Zionist movement. Look, the Aguda didn't like it. Right? The right-wing religious said like this, who gave you the right to represent the Jewish people? Blah, 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 blah. I get it. Well, nobody listened to them. You know, Chaim Sonnenfeld and Isaac Breuer and others also used to protest against it. Nobody even heard they existed. Okay? So they wanted, from the beginning, to have an official political legitimacy. In 1947, the United Nations, as you know, the successor to the League of Nations, said that there should be a Jewish state, at least part of Palestine. That's the November 29th, 1947 UN resolution. So again, in international law, Israel was grounded. It wasn't simply that they, fought their way to kind of independence. They got international recognition. And we all know the story that when Israel went ahead on May 14th, 1948, and proclaimed the state of Israel, Truman and Stalin both recognized Israel on the same day. Truman chapped the Rhine, so he got there first. And if you want to be technical about it, the United States, 5 minutes after they proclaimed the state of Israel in Tel Aviv, the United States recognized Israel de facto, and like a couple hours later, Stalin recognized Israel de jure. You understand? No, Russia acknowledged Israel as completely legitimate. America recognized Israel as partially legitimate. That's the famous episode of Truman, recognized the state of Israel. I mean, right away. Okay, you must remember this. The State Department was fighting this, and they wanted to get the establishment of Israel delayed and have instead a trusteeship. And Philip Jessup, the United States representative in the General Assembly, was making a speech in which he said, we are favoring that there shouldn't be an establishment in the state of Israel right now, and instead there should be this United Nations trusteeship, which we hope will prevent a war. And then they hand them the paper. You can see it on YouTube. And they hand them the paper, And he said, well, under new instructions, I guess we're in favor of this sort of thing. And by the way, one of the big things Israel did in 1949, it's a long and complicated story, is they got accepted as a member state of the United Nations. Now, by the way, this would never happen today. It was a different UN, okay? And that's why you have Moshe Sharett goes there and all these other guys, because that's like the acme of political legitimacy in the international arena. Israel is a member state of the United Nations. You see? If you remember, back in '75, they tried to have Zionism as racism, and the next step would be to kick Israel out of the United Nations, but the Ford administration wouldn't go along with it. That's Moynihan's famous speech. The inability of Israel to gain any legitimacy to annex the Shtachim. That's been Israel's problem since 1967. Nobody recognizes settlements. Nobody recognized that Israel has any right to lands beyond 67. And even though the Israeli legal experts and people like that, like Professor Kantorovich, can give you all kind of arguments, I mean, sound legalistic arguments, because the land never belonged to anybody, and this, that, the other, the world don't go along with that. Raise your hand, you think that that'll float in the current international climate, okay? Israel's got enough trouble defending like Tel Aviv, as I say. So the lack of legitimacy in its occupation is like a big problem in the Israeli position. Except for Trump, the eccentricity of Trump, who recognized the Golan. I mean, that's quite remarkable, right? And by the way, Biden, to the best of my knowledge, never formally retracted that. So that's extraordinary, because Israel got the Golan through a war. And the United Nations said there's inadmissibility of the acquisition of territory through force. But Trump is his own thing, you know? Look at this. There's Trump. There's wait a second. There's Trump. There's Bibi, if I can see correctly. That's Mike Pompeo. There's Jared. What's her name? Huckabee. And so forth. No, there's a small group, you know what I'm saying? And he recognized, what's it say over here? Israeli officials lobbied U.S. and recognized sovereignty over territory, political gift from President Trump in a bid to help Bibi, gave favorable standing for the 1920 elections, condemned by a number of countries, et cetera, et cetera. The revival runs the world in a funny way, but that didn't really give international legitimacy to it, okay? Back in 2000, this was unimaginable, that the United States, any president, would recognize the Golan as being successfully annexed by Israel. Adrabah, the Clinton administration, if you recall, in 2000 was working on a Golan track to return the Golan to Syria in exchange for real peace. Remember the Y negotiations in Maryland and all the rest of it? No one could foresee, by the way, at that time, in the year 2000, when the old Assad was about to kick the bucket and being taken over by young Assad, nobody could see that within a few years, the whole Syria would explode in a gigantic civil war, which would cost at least 1 million dead, and I don't know how many million other casualties, okay? So what would have been, let me get this straight now. So what would have happened if Barak would have signed a peace treaty with Assad and pulled out of the Golan Heights, that the Syrians would respect it, because you know and I know, you can look down on Israel from there, and there would come the civil war with the Iranians, the Hezbollah involved. I mean, no one could see this in the future. You see? This is the problem. Nobody could foresee this. And nobody could see, by the way, that this would expose the Assad regime for what it was. In Clinton's time, the Assad regime was looked at legitimate, if you remember that. It was looked at regular government of Syria. He was a tough guy. People didn't realize he was suppressing all of his people, killing them by the millions, in the Homs massacre and things like this. And the people below him don't agree with anything that he does. And so you're dealing with a Saddam Hussein type. Yeah, but they didn't see it that way. You know, politics is like that. We always see a quarter of a millimeter ahead, not beyond that. By the way, and they didn't know at that time what Iran and Hezbollah were, which is why, as I told you before, because of the Hezbollah intervention in the Syrian civil war, look at all these celebrations when Israel killed Israel. These are Arabs. They're singing Hey Venu Shalom. What's that? There were cities that were, because inside Syria you could get hurt for doing this. That's enough, we can do it. Yeah, thank you. You get the idea. But back to Israel's legitimacy quest. Israel for decades, really since the 50s, had a long quest to legitimize what I call the Mossad-mistress relationships. Right? There's this great book from this Israeli professor. One second. But they wanted it, and the name is From Mistress to Wife. Mi Pilegesh LeYedua B'Tzibur, which is actually not what it means. It means live-in girlfriend. But whatever the case is, Israel, and we've talked about this in the past, has had close relationships between the Mossad on the one hand and these Arab and Muslim countries' intelligence networks on the other. I'll just give you one example that comes to mind. Indonesia is a Muslim country, but the Mossad has been tied up with them since the 60s. You see? Morocco is a Muslim country, but the Mossad has been tied up with them, again, since the 60s. Jordan, even before the peace treaty, King Hussein was tied up with them for decades. I think I told you. King Hussein used to go around all the time with a big bodyguard because they tried to kill him all the time. But he went to Israel on his own helicopter, right? And they said, how can you go by yourself? He says, the one place I'm going to be safe is in Israel, right? They don't have to kill me, you see? And other countries as well, Sudan, Saudi Arabia, believe it or not, and now even in the Gulf states. Israel's had these relationships for a long, long time, but you can never acknowledge them, right? And if you know the history, it's this fat book. I thought I put it up there, by Professor Podet. And you see in the 50s and 60s, all the rest, Turkey, for example, Israel said, can we publicize this? No, don't publicize this. You see? Or back in the time of the Shah, can we announce it? No, you can't announce this. Everything has to be like an illicit affair because we can't have the public angry at us. So there will be no legitimacy arising from these relationships, simply mutual interest, right? Mutual interest. This, by the way, has been a major feature of Bibi's policy until October 7th. What was he trying to do? Get these countries to come out of the closet and publicly say, we recognize Israel. That was the Abraham Accords under Trump, right? We forget about this now. According to news reports, I don't know if it's true, I'm not sure if it's true, it might be, one of the motivations for Sinwar to launch the attack against Israel October 7th was to put a spin, to block the realization of these Abraham Accords. Makes sense? Yeah, makes sense. This has been accelerated by the threat of imperial Iran and its proxies. That's why Trump was able to get the Abraham Accords, because they're afraid of Iran, as you know. The whole history of the Arab Middle East, actually, is one of trying to build empires and having them fall apart. That's the history of the Middle East. The Persian Empire, the Ottoman Turkish Empire, the Safavid Empire, the Saladin Empire. You know, I mean, that's what the caliphates, that's the history of the Middle East. Somebody comes in, and then Humpty Dumpty falls down, but he is put together again under a different name. Indeed, the same is true of all the created Arab states. as I've said over the years, none of the Arab states except Egypt is a state. They were created by the British and the French and the others. Who drew the borders of Israel? Palestine. Who drew the borders of Syria? Who said that a country called Syria and a country of Iraq should have a border over here and be separate? And so forth and so on. Who said you should take a piece of Syria called Lebanon and should include this in this business? Who decided that the Litani River should not be in Palestine but should be in Lebanon? You see? It was the British and the French in 1923. They made a horse trade. We'll get exclusive control of the Kinneret. You get the Litani River. You see? So it's all outsiders that did these things. And therefore, shock. There's a giant civil war all the time in Iraq because the three parts don't want to live with each other. There's a giant civil war all the time in Syria because the different groups don't want to live with each other. The Sunnis and the Shiites and the Druze and the Hezbollah and this one down there, the Alawites and all the rest of it. You got to be weird to know all these things. So we'll deal with that later. But by the year 2000, Israel, in terms of its legitimacy quest, had actually got a nice shot in the arm because of the fall of the Iron Curtain countries and the bevy of new friendly states in the former Warsaw Pact territories. Remember, there were a whole bunch of countries that didn't recognize Israel in Ronald Reagan's time, and they did it in Clinton's time. Okay? Take a look. Even today, these countries are generally friendly to Israel. Poland, East Germany is now part of Germany. The Czech and the Slovak. Hungary, Romania, Bulgaria. Okay? Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia. Ukraine, Belarus, Moldova, and some of these other places. Albania, for crying out loud, has a nice embassy and gets along with Israel, and Israel sells them weapons, things like this. These were the leaders of the non-recognizing Israel group not that long ago, right? At the time I got married, let's put it that way. And they changed. And so Israel started, this helped people like Ehud Barak say like this: we're gaining a lot of traction. Rabin, by the way, held secret negotiations, you won't believe this, with North Korea. There was a time in the 90s when Israel called with North Korea. I don't think that would be good, but that was, in terms of your quest for legitimacy, you're getting every country in the world to recognize you. You see? This is an Israeli mishigas, which we understand. On the other hand, today, in the current conflict, as I said before, the illegitimacy of Israel is a staple of pro-Hamas rhetoric. I mean, the Squad, as they call them, and Rashida Tlaib and all these people. I mean, they say none of Israel has a right to be there. It's all stolen. It's not a question of two-state or anything like that. It's all, they don't have any right to be there whatsoever. And they're pushing this on the campuses, and they're pushing this in the public schools in the United States of America. If you follow that sort of thing, there's a big article in the Free Press on this the other day. In a belt of school systems in this country, and the textbooks and the others, what you're really saying is that Israel has no right to be there. They redraw the maps. They do 100 different sorts of things. And as you know, the universities don't do anything about it. The states don't do anything about it. The departments of education do things about it. And we're going to be seeing, I hope I'm wrong, a whole generation of young Americans with a completely different way of looking at the Middle East, especially and specifically on the legitimacy question. And so it won't be a question whether Israel has the right to do this and the other. Why are you sending weapons to a country that doesn't have a right to exist? Why are you sending money and any kind of support whatsoever? Why isn't America pushing to end its diplomatic relations with Israel? Why aren't we kicking Israel out of the United Nations? These are things that's coming down the line, right? So that's what you call the anti-legitimacy quest, right? And by the way, this is a directed policy. Hamas has been running this since October 7th. All the campus demonstrations and across the country, other things, are run by Hamas agents, and they'll tell you, this guy will say so right now. Look at this.
أعتقد أن الرهان على قدرة العرب
He's
والمسلمين على استثمار هذه التحولات التي نشهدها من خلال مشاركة الطلاب الغربيين المتظاهرين في الغرب. تم الطلاب عرب يتظاهرون في الغرب، هذا نفهمه، لكن الطلاب الغربيون الذين يتظاهرون تأييدا لفلسطين، رهاننا هو على قدرة الاستثمار على هذا التفاعل الإيجابي من قبل هؤلاء الطلاب للمستقبل. نستثمر مع الطلاب الغربيين. بدنا ندخل إلى صلب المجتمعات الغربية،
وهل نحن قادرون
وبدنا
على
نخاطب
ذلك؟
الناس بالغرب. يعني
لدينا أدوات يعني للدخول إلى
هذا
هذا.
التحدي، هذا التحدي، ويجب أن نفعله.
The guy said it. What? They are raising money, and I don't know why you don't see what's in the front of your face. How come all these people all of a sudden pop out of nowhere have the same slogans, right? How come they have all the signs and everything? This is directed. We've seen this before in Jewish history, and if you have a talented group of agitators and they know how to prey on everybody else, it'll happen. You know what I'm saying? Who organized that there should be a thing this day? And who gets them the materials to build, the camps and all the rest of it? This is centrally directed. You won't believe it until you see it in the New York Times. I get it. Some people like it. But that's what's going on, okay? And it's an attack on legitimacy, right? Israel's more vulnerable to this rhetoric than she will admit. It captures the young. It captures the Jewish youth. It captures Jewish youth. By the way, the other day I saw, now they're making a target of the Hillels. It's serious. Just Google Hillel and demonstrations and thing, because Hillel represents a pro-Israel type organization, and they do encourage trips to Israel and things like that. And I'm telling you, it's not a fight over should Israel do this, or were they too brutal in the prosecution of war, or are they occupying too much land? It's only, they have a right to exist. Why bother with the periphery? Go to the heart of it. And that's what they're doing. And Americans, as you see, don't see it. I won't comment on this in the context of the coming election. Let's see what happens. And it's always one president away. That's all that matters, right? What I'm talking about is one president away. If you have a president that'll buy into this sort of thing, Israel's up the creek. In my opinion, this is one big political success of Hamas in Iran. It's a big one. And this is happening in 2024. It was not the case in 2000. Hamas then was not as powerful. Arafat still dominated the scene, and he was publicly at least committed to a two-state solution, which means acknowledging Israel's basic legitimacy. That's why Barak and Clinton made such a push at the Camp David meeting in 2000. Clinton and Barak thought alike. Let's get Arafat to sign the paper, Israel's right to exist, at least within these borders. But Arafat would not agree, as we know, even though he was offered the whole business and the Harabais and the rest of it. That's how much Barak and the left in Israel wanted to obtain this legitimacy. But as we know, Arafat would not bring himself to acknowledge Israel's permanent legitimacy, because that would mean that Israel won the 1948 war. That would mean that there is no right to return. That's too much for the Palestinians, and it still is. As we shall see, Barak was soon turned out of office by the Likud, and the right has held power in Israel ever since, with one short break. Indeed, in the last election, Meretz was destroyed. They couldn't even get one, okay? And if elections were held today, with all the mistakes of Bibi and all the rest of it, which is true, the left would not win. On the other hand, has the right been able to provide Israel with peace and security? Or is permanent conflict the price of survival? Let's explore this in the coming weeks. Good night.